information today and some access to resources today that's going to be useful for you in your position and that you can bring back to your team and to your partners for broader adoption. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of lay out kind of why we get to be here today. We definitely heard from you all that there was a need to start really digging into how do we ingrain what's happening so that we have it available to students in the long term, right? So not just students today and tomorrow, but students far into the future. We get to do this work and bring these sessions to you through the Southeast Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. And that is a project funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The Southeast MHTTC is located in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Rollins School of Public Health. And I'm really grateful to be here with some of the Southeast MHTTC team today. Andrew, Sarah, Tara, thank you so much for your support. And we'll share some of the links at the end of today's session. In case you haven't realized, there's an amazing batch of resources available to you around school mental health through the Southeast MHTTC. And so again, we're really grateful to be able to serve the Southeast region, including 8 states. We're also part of a national network, so you may be from outside of the Southeast and aware of your regional mental health technology transfer center and their school mental health project. Again, the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center network is nationwide. And today we're here because we get to work with the Southeast MHTTC. And that's largely what I've been doing for the last few years. So my name is Christina Borbet. I'm going to be leading today's session. And I've been working in school mental health at a national level since 2014. Before that, I was really focused on substance use prevention. But all of my work has been focused on community-driven approaches to improving outcomes for young people. By far, working on school mental health initiatives is my passion. I love it. I was previously the project director for the Now is the Time Technology TA Center, including the Project Aware TA Center from 2014 to 2019. And I continue to work in depth with Project Aware grantees, as well as other school mental health initiatives, both in my local state of California and nationally. So I'm really excited to be here today and share some of the resources and tools that I've accumulated, some of the templates that I've built so that you can kind of bring them to your home communities and start putting them to work. I'm a passionate champion of young people and a passionate ally to anyone who is a champion of young people. So if there are ways that I can support you, if there are ways that we can support you at the Southeast MHTTC, I encourage you to reach out. Today's session is really designed to be an introduction or kind of overview level of what do we want to be thinking about when we say sustainability. It's one word that means really important stuff on a number of different dimensions. And so today we just want to cover some of those and get a sense from you about where we might want to go deeper. So as we go through today's session, I'm going to be asking for your input in the chat so that you can share with me kind of what you want to know more about, and that way we can build out some responsive learning opportunities and resources for you all on the sustainability topics that matter most to the work that you're doing. Today, we're going to talk about key concepts and considerations for ensuring that the core elements of school mental health initiatives are secure for the long term. We're going to talk about the tools and resources that guide sustainability planning and implementation. And then we're going to talk about how do we engage partners and stakeholders in the sustainability process. So we'll be weaving these throughout. Let's take a look at how we're going to use the time together today. This is our agenda. I want to remind folks that we organize this as a 75-minute session. Sometimes those 60-minute sessions are just too much of a crunch, and we didn't want to feel that way. That said, this is what we're going to cover. So we'll go just 15 minutes past the hour. We're going to talk about defining sustainability, the common barriers to tackling sustainability, effective practices. So that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time today, is really looking at what are the effective practices to assess capacity for sustainability, to prioritize and define what it is we want to sustain, and how do we design and implement a plan that will allow us to maintain that longevity. Now, Again, as I mentioned, we get to cover all of this content and share these resources and tools with you across these different domains through the Southeast MHTTC, funded by SAMHSA. And if those of you who are new to this whole pitch, I want to just let you know, and for those of you who've been in our sessions before, this is a reminder that we bring these to your region at no cost. And SAMHSA would like us to gather some information from you in exchange. So SAMHSA funds us and then also asks us to ask you some questions. So I'm just setting your expectations now. That'll be really, really, really helpful and important for us to be able to continue to offer responsive learning opportunities. If you'll take 3 to 5 minutes at the end of today's session to complete a very brief survey called the GPRA, GPRA. And Andrew will put that link in at the end of the session, but I'm just setting your expectations now. Again, it's really instrumental to our continued funding from SAMHSA and our ability to bring these sessions to you. So let's jump in. I'm gonna get some input from you all and think about what do we mean when we say sustainability, okay? So think about it. When I say sustainability, what comes to mind? And I know you probably said funding right off the bat. I'm going to say pause on that. And let's just take a minute to think at the meta level. What do we mean when we say sustainability? Right? So when we think about our school mental health initiatives, when we think about our programs, when we think about our staffing levels, we think about keeping things the same over time, right? That's sustainability. We think about predictable program cycles, right? Or predictable program growth. So maybe we're, in terms of sustainability, we're thinking about being able to repeat that 12-week curriculum. Or maybe we're talking about being able to replicate that model that you're using for school mental health across all schools in your district. And then we think about really kind of weaving it into the fabric of how we do school, right? We do school by incorporating school mental health. So it becomes our MO. And that's what we think about when we are answering the question, what is sustainability? What I want to do now is do a very small shift and kind of reframe that a little bit. Okay. So let's take a look here and kind of think about how we do this attitude shift or this mental shift to think about sustainability as adapting over time, but keeping core elements at play. Okay. So I'm just going to pause there. It's not about necessarily keeping things exactly the same, but being willing to flex and grow and shift with the ever-changing landscape that we find ourselves in, while holding on to some of the core pieces that we know are essential to student well-being, that we know are essential to school climate, that we know are imperative for student outcomes and overall positive development. When we think about predictable program cycles or growth, what if we shifted that to think a little bit about future-focused, flexible vision of our initiative, right? So sometimes we get so stuck in our mindset on this is the goal, this is how we want it to be, and that's the only way that it can be. And if it's any different, we've failed. What I'm asking us to do is kind of open up and innovate the realm of possibilities of what it means to carry forward the success of our work. So thinking ahead, thinking out to the horizon, right? So beyond the end of the school year, beyond the end of a strategic plan that you might have in place, beyond the horizon of a particular grant or funding cycle, thinking big picture for our communities of young people. What is a future-focused, flexible vision of what school mental health will look like? And how do we put that as our goal and work towards that? And finally, and this one I feel like is a really nuanced shift, is really thinking about going from, well, this is how we do things, to a more specific values-driven mindset. So making decisions based on value, right? Values of equity, that all students are given the supports that they need in order to thrive in school settings. Just one example. So again, these are some minor shifts, but as we go through the content today, I just wanted to kind of have folks keep in mind that sustainability can be more than doing what we've always done forever, ongoing, always. It can be more flexible, it can be more adaptive, and it can be kind of really more visionary in our approach, and so that the success that we're aiming for, it kind of shifts our metrics of success. Like, were we able to achieve sustainability or not? Well, if we define sustainability as continued, consistent implementation of effective policies, strategies, and practices, right, that opens it up. It doesn't mean it has to be the same one we're doing now, but we want it to be continued and consistent. We also want it to make sure that we're investing in those effective practices, and those can change over time depending on the needs and depending on the landscape that we're working in. It can shift if we think about making sure that programs or services continue because they are valued, they draw support, and they draw resources, right? All of those things in order to achieve the outcomes that our students need. And then thinking about a district or school community's ongoing capacity and resolve to work together to establish, advance, and maintain effective strategies that continuously improve health and quality of life for all. So again, what that looks like be different from what it looks like in 5 years, but we know that ongoing collective commitment to ensuring that there is improvement of health and quality of life for all can be a really great indicator that sustainability is happening. And finally, kind of this is what we're really aiming for, right? This is the big ticket item, is that we want to maintain those positive outcomes. So if we boil it all down and say, what is sustainability? It's maintaining the positive outcomes that we need for our young people, for our school communities. And so again, these are kind of just slight shifts in how we approach sustainability to be more encompassing and more focused on what is it that we actually want to do, right? Is it maintaining the same old thing forever and always with the same folks, with the same levels of access, service, people? It may not be, right? There may be some contractions and some expansions that make more sense given the overall vision of positive outcomes for our school communities. So I'm going to pause there and ask you all to add to the chat, because this is I'm starting with a softball here, folks. I know I just kind of went really theoretical with sustainability, but we're going to go really practical right now. And what I want you to add to the chat are what you experience as barriers to sustainability. So if someone says, is your initiative going to be sustainable? Why or why not? I find that people really readily have answers to the why not. And some of the most common barriers are things like funding, staff turnover, and more specifically, leadership and administrative turnover. So those are the three that I hear most often. But I want to hear from you all, if you don't mind adding to the chat, what are some of the barriers that you experience? And again, adding these to the chat gives us collectively, as the community here today, some idea of what are our shared experiences. You know, some of the barriers to sustainability might be things like, I just don't have the time to get to it, Christina. And then there are kind of other more community or school or district specific politics or other parameters or considerations that come into play. And so again, putting that in the chat so we can all kind of resonate with what we're seeing come up the most often as potential challenges, as potential areas where we're going to need to see workarounds. So I'll give folks just a moment to respond there. And as we move forward together today, what I want to do is really think about, given these barriers, how do we pick the low-hanging fruit? How do we go after the pieces that are going to be the most viable? So the good news is we're not here to do the impossible today. What we're looking for are what are the opportunities to do what's possible to maintain the positive outcomes that we're experiencing through our school mental health initiative, right? And so I want to just kind of put this in context. How do we figure out what is possible? So if I said sustainability and you were like, no way, Christina. I mean, you showed up for this session, so I'm assuming that you're not going to be too hard to sell on this idea that sustainability is worthwhile. But I know that there can just feel like there's just so many things in the way, and especially right now where our plates are overflowing. Sustainability has never felt more important. And it may also feel like it's never been more impossible to add one more thing to your to-do list. So what I'd like to do is just think about today as what are the bite-sized pieces that you can take and chew. So we're not trying to do everything forever, always. We're trying to do what's possible right now and likely to contribute to the longevity of this initiative, the longevity of this program, the longevity of this staffing, the longevity of this policy. And to do that, one of the key things that we need to do, one of the key things that we need to do is think about planning. And yep, so this is our planning slide. And so I wanted to just kind of make a quick case for why being intentional about how we approach sustainability is going to be so key. So if you recall, sustainability is this big amorphous thing. We're going to talk about it when we get to the assessment piece of things, but it's this huge endeavor. And I'm not asking you to take on this huge endeavor. I'm asking you to approach sustainability with intention. So really thinking about what am I capable of doing right now? Where can I rally some support? Because this is going to be not just on you, but a collective effort with some of your key stakeholders, including partners, including leadership. And so thinking about like, what can you get momentum around right now? And it might not be a huge, heavy, we're going to lift everything sustainability. It might be pieces of this. And so the sustainability planning process really narrows your focus and really allows you to layer in what your criteria are for what's possible, what's viable right now. So we know that using a process that guides your program's directions, goals, strategies is going to serve as the glue. It's going to hold it all together. It's going to keep you focused. It's going to keep it from mushrooming to something that feels untenable. Without a strategic direction like this, we know that the long-term goals of projects often find themselves only reacting to the day-to-day demands, right? So thinking about sustainability is like, I'll do that tomorrow. Right now, I'm putting out 7 different fires. But having a strategic plan, an intention for how you go about this will allow you to build sustainability into the things that you're already doing. So instead of adding on, it's adding in, right? So just kind of layering in, grabbing that low-hanging fruit where you see it in your day-to-day process. And so it just takes a small amount of time even. Sometimes people think a planning process is a year-long endeavor. It could be an afternoon, it could be an hour. But really just kind of going about making sure you set the intention for what it is you want to pursue for the long term is really going to help use your resources, your energy more efficiently. So let's talk a minute about the components of sustainability planning, right? So this first one, I mentioned it just a minute ago. I'm going to double down on this one. Collectively define sustainability for your school mental health program or initiative. Okay. I know a lot of times it feels like we're so isolated in the work, and I just want to play that back for you. A lot of times we are really isolated in our work, and that can feel like a barrier, right, to achieving what feels like we need all hands on deck to achieve. And so what I'm encouraging you to do is find ways that it's possible to build in consensus around what we mean when we say sustainability, right? So I shared those definitions with you earlier, and I want to just highlight again that different people have different ideas about sustainability. You may even want to use a different term, right? I really like to use the word longevity. Sustainability is played out. It gives people the heebie-jeebies sometimes because they've been through so many sustainability processes. And so thinking about how do we make this palatable? How do we engage folks in the process and collectively define? Is it the longevity of our outcomes? Is it the maintenance of our staffing levels? Is it the scaling of this particular policy or protocol? So really kind of making sure that we have people, is it really integrating, for example, a values-driven approach? Or defining that shared vision. So again, it could mean all of these different things. There's only one right answer, and that's yours. And so thinking about how do we bring in voice to really co-define what we mean by sustainability for this particular initiative. Is a key component to sustainability planning. And as we walk through the tools and resources that I'm going to share, you'll see that there's so many different styles, so many different models for engaging, whether it's all the school counselors in your district, whether it's leadership, whether it's families and caregivers, whether it's students, whether it's community partners. Again, kind of thinking broad spectrum about who do we want to have voice in achieving the longevity of these outcomes for young people. Another key component of sustainability planning is short and long-term goal setting. And we're going to talk more about that in the third section, where we get into like, what does a sustainability plan include? But making sure that you have kind of the near and dear, like, what can I do right now before the end of the school year? What can I do before the end of this grant cycle? And then long-term, right? What are we looking at for our district? What are we looking at for our educational region in the next 10 years? And so weaving those kind of pieces together, making sure that you're setting criteria for prioritizing program or initiative elements. The key word in there is setting criteria. Right? Criteria means that not everything makes the cut. Right? Some things are worth retiring or sunsetting so that other things can blossom and grow or take their place. And so making sure that you have intentional criteria about what makes the cut for investing in longevity is going to be a really essential part of your planning. And then again, kind of setting some criteria or setting some expectations around what are the core or essential elements that are going to be key to ensure that all students have access to the desired outcomes, right? And so we'll talk about all of this in our sustainability planning, but I want to go ahead and move us into, I think I made a strong pitch for sustainability planning. If anyone's still on the fence about like, do I need to be intentional about sustainability? Reach out to me and we'll do a sidebar conversation. But it's really just kind of, again, it's intention setting around sustainability. So it doesn't have to be another massive planning process. You don't have to bring in a consultant. You don't have to adopt or learn a new paradigm or a new model. We're going to cover today, again, kind of what we mean about sustainability planning and why it's going to be helpful to you just to make what's possible actually achievable. And so again, as we go through these next three segments, we're going to talk about assessing our capacity for sustainability. We're going to talk about prioritizing and defining what it is we want to have longevity. And then we're going to actually talk about what does a plan look like, who needs to be involved, and what do they need to do. So in those three sections, at the end of each section, I will share concrete tools, resources, templates for you, and Andrew will be putting those in the chat for you. So why don't we go ahead and jump into what we mean when we say assess, okay? So as I mentioned, sustainability is this big amorphous thing, right? It could be this huge and heavy lift, and if you're into doing the whole thing, that's fantastic. We have resources to support you in doing all elements of it. But I want to just, again, play into this idea that we have some momentum, we have some strengths in certain areas that are key to our sustainability, that are key to our longevity. And when I say kind of lean into those or pick that low-hanging fruit, that's what's making the possible achievable. So let's take a quick look at what we mean when we say capacity for sustainability. These are just some of the facets. Sustainability is broad and wide and deep, right? And so when we think about sustainability, it's not just one thing. It's having momentum, it's having capability, it's having resources, it's having a knack for any of these key areas. So public policy and political support, administrative policies and practices, leadership, management, and oversight, champions of our school mental health initiatives. That's part of our capacity wheel. Partnerships and collaborations, infrastructure, right? Where infrastructure is a big one. It's not the only one, as you can see. Human resources and workforce development efforts, awareness campaigns, communication and marketing efforts, and financing. I put financing at the bottom for a particular reason. So when I say sustainability, you say money. I get it, right? That seems to be everybody's go-to. And so that is definitely a piece of it. But I want you to look at all of these other dimensions, all of these other capabilities, so that if you're lacking in one, or it's too heavy a lift, or it's a no-go for any reason, there are all of these other dimensions where you can play to your strengths, where you can boost or enhance or advance your efforts. And so that's really what we want to think about when we're doing assessments. And we'll talk about particular sustainability assessment tools. But again, the idea isn't to give yourself a report card and say, here are your deficiencies. The idea is to give yourself an inventory and say, here are my assets. So let's take a look at one particular model. So this one comes from the George Warren Brown School of Social Work. And it kind of factors in some of the facets I just mentioned, but in a particular, it kind of narrows them down or distills them a little bit. And I want to just, again, kind of go a little bit, I know I said this is overview level. I want to just make sure that we're setting the foundation for what we mean by sustainability, and assessing the capabilities around sustainability by going through these just quickly, so you have a sense of what are we talking about here. And what we'll land on after this are, I'll give you particular tools or inventories that you can use either with a group or on your own or with a partner to kind of take a look at and do kind of a quick gauge of where you fall on the spectrum of any of these dimensions, so that you can make some intentional choices about where you invest your efforts for longevity. So at the top of the wheel here, we have environmental support, and that could mean things like having a supportive internal and external climate for your program, okay? But that's not the only option. If that's an area where you're challenged, let's move on and look at some of the other options. Going to the right, we have funding stability. That's the money, money, money one. Establishing a consistent financial base for your program. We're going to talk about a particular tool to assess where you are with your financing strategies for sustainability. And then at the end of the session today, we'll also share some upcoming resources that might be available to you to support around this area. The Southeast MHTTC has a lot in their resource library that contributes to this area of capability funding stability. Partnerships, this is my favorite one. I love to collaborate. So thinking about partnerships as a resource and as an asset to your longevity is key. Cultivating connections between your program and stakeholders or allies in your area is going to be really essential to kind of building groundswell, building support, building alliances that ensure that your values-driven approach to outcomes can be maintained and advanced over time. Organizational capacity, I mentioned this one before in terms of infrastructure. So organizational capacity, infrastructure, another key area, having the internal support and resources that you need to effectively manage your program and its activities. The next one is program evaluation, and that's a word that can mean many different things. But really what we want to make sure that we have as part of our sustainability capability is evidence that this is worth sustaining. So whatever that means to you, whether you do your own evaluation, whether you're just thinking about evaluation for the first time, or whether you're contracted out, whether you contract out your evaluation, you have funding for that to an external evaluator. All we mean here, again, it can look so many different ways, and there's so many resources to help meet you where you are and build out this capability to really document the value, the impact of the work that you do, so that you can make a strong case for what you want to sustain and make informed decisions, as I mentioned, using those criteria to decide what are the elements, what are the core program components that you want to keep going, and what feels like, based on your evaluation, what feels like it could be retired or sunsetted because needs may have shifted or it's not as effective as that you had hoped. Program adaptation, that's the flexibility that we talked about. Are there actions that you can take to adapt the program and to ensure its ongoing effectiveness? So assessing where is the rigidity and where's the flexibility in the initiative. And then finally here we have communications. So another key capability is being able to disseminate, to brand, to kind of build familiarity and ensure that there's ongoing connection within your team and with your partners and stakeholders and your funders to talk about what it is and what you need and in order to achieve those ongoing outcomes for young people. All right, so that was the deepest dive we're doing today. That was it. But I just wanted to give you a sense of these different facets when we go deep, these different facets that we really want to get a handle on. And a lot of times when I'm going to move us to these tools, and Andrew, if you can put some of these in the chat for me. A lot of times what we're talking about are these, these inventories where they're asking you a question on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly are you supported by leadership in your district? And so these scales are useful. They really kind of help give a quantifiable gauge of where you might land on any of the facets that we talked about. That said, I often use these tools in a completely different way. I like to bring these tools to the teams that I work on or the clients that I work with and use them as conversation starters. And it could be a series of conversations, or it could be one afternoon. It could be, 1 or 2 people with key program knowledge, or it could be a really good bellwether to ask multiple folks who might not be that closely involved with the project to respond to some of these prompts, because it builds their awareness of what are the foundational elements for longevity. And it also may give you kind of different angle, different point of view of where you have strengths that you can lean into. So again, I didn't want to overwhelm folks with tools and resources, but here are 3 key assessment tools that I thought would be useful for you all to have if you just want to get a lay of the land, or if you want some good conversation starters for building momentum or building buzz around intentional longevity planning. So I'm going to go ahead and move us forward, and hopefully as I'm going through, I have to say I have a couple of screens going, and so I'm not monitoring chat as I am going through content, but there will be time at the end, and so hopefully Tara or Andrew, you can kind of synthesize for me what we're seeing as any key questions that pop up in the chat, and I'll loop back to them at the end. Another key piece before we move on to segment 2 of best practices, we just did assessment, we're moving on to prioritizing and defining. But before I do that, I just wanted to let folks know that if there are particular aspects or that I mentioned that you would like a deeper dive on, right? So let's back up for a minute. If any of these particular components feel like I want to know everything there is to know, I want all the examples, please put that in the chat because we would like to follow up with some additional kind of deeper dive sessions to support what resonates most with you. Okay, so let's imagine, right? We're on our way to our intentional longevity planning, and we have gotten the lay of the land. And this is an ongoing cyclical process, right? We're just constantly judging what's the weather out there. What do we have in place? What are we missing? What strengths can we play to? Where do we want to build up? And so we're engaged in the ongoing assessment process to make sure that we have a firm grasp on where our capabilities lie. And we now need to think more specifically around those kind of what makes the cut. Okay? And this is the prioritizing and the defining. And I just want to, before we kind of move into the prioritizing and defining piece, just want to say that as you do the assessment for your school mental health initiative, I want you to just think about the answers that you come up with or the conversations that you have about one particular program or one particular policy or one campaign or one initiative may be different than the next one. And so, applying these tools can be this kind of universal process if you want to look big picture, or you can really drill down and do a specific application of these tools based on the different projects or programs that you're running. Same thing with prioritizing and defining. okay? So one of the key things that we really want to be mindful of, and I brought this up in the beginning, is that we don't need to sustain everything, right? We don't need to sustain everything. It doesn't need to be all of it the same way, always and forever, okay? And that can be either stressful and unnerving, or it can be a big relief. So I don't know what you just felt when I said that, like, you don't need to sustain everything. And some of you may have been like, oh, no, don't say it, Christina, we need all of it. And others of you might have been like awash with relief, thinking, oh my gosh, that's so much more doable if I don't have to do it all. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, I want you to just, again, kind of take this mindset of intentionality, right? And making sure that you are working with your team. And that could be your school team, it could be your district team, it could be a coalition or a group that a work group that you put together, but really kind of unpacking what it is that you want longevity for. And the value in this, again, could be that it narrows your focus. Or, again, it could be that you find out you need to sustain all of it. I really doubt that's going to be the case. In my experience, that's rarely the case. But this process of intentionally defining what it is we want to sustain really distills down, again, what are some of the key elements, right? What's the magic in the bottle that we want to hold on to? And then the other piece is, I'm not saying we don't do them anymore, right? You may continue them, but if they fall away or if they shift and change, that's where you get your adaptations, your flexibility in order to pursue that bigger picture vision of positive outcomes for young people. So this is kind of the first layer, is defining what it is we want to sustain. And part of that is making sure that you have consistent criteria in place. And I'm going to share some examples of what I mean by criteria. But that process means coming up with the criteria, and oftentimes it's useful to have more than one voice in defining what those criterion are. Using them to identify specific program and initiative priorities. So you not only have to come up with the criteria, you then have to apply them. Okay, and that can be a political process. So just warning you ahead of time. And then outlining key tasks, right? What can be done between now and, for example, the end of a particular grant cycle or the end of a particular program cycle or a school year that's going to contribute to holding on to that magic in the bottle, right? That's our kind of short or immediate term goal. So let's look a little bit more closely at this. Here are some examples I pulled. So as I mentioned, I've been doing this work across communities for quite some time. And when we do this group process of setting the criteria, these are the most common criteria that I see come up. So these are not necessarily the right answer for you all, but just to kind of stir the pot and kind of get things going in your frame of mind. Some of the things are alignment with vision, making sure that it's evidence-based, positive impact on students, positive impact on schools, that it's cost-effective and has a return on investment, that there's community support. And by community support, we could be talking about the school community, the district community, the community at large. So again, just having that buy-in, or that that it's kind of valued and recognized by the stakeholders, that it addresses community needs or gaps, that there are the available resources to keep a particular endeavor going, that there's leadership support, or that it's low-hanging fruit. It's what's easily replicable or already in progress, right? So for those of you who always like to pick the hardest thing and do that, that's not what these criteria are about. Okay. So I want to pause there and see if folks have any examples of criteria that they use for deciding what it is they want to maintain, or what it is they want to have longevity in their community. So if you could go ahead and add that to the chat. All right. I know we're going to get lots of good ideas from this. And so we'll have a chance to kind of discuss if you have kind of particular approaches for defining, I'm going to go back one, for defining your criteria for what you want to keep going, and then for applying those criteria for what you want to keep going. And I want to share just a quick example before we move forward. So I worked with a community in Central California to go through this process to really set the criteria for what it is that we want to sustain in the work, which was a really fun collaborative brainstorming session. Folks had great ideas, really kind of thoughtful perspectives on how do we set the standards for what makes the cut, or for what gets included, and then or what gets a lower level of priority. In this particular community, the idea wasn't, well, if you don't make the cut, forget it, it's done. The idea was using the criteria or setting the criteria with the idea that these would be the priority elements to sustain. And so if we got to a place where we had to make tough decisions because of staffing turnover or because of funding shifts, that we would have a transparent mechanism in place to make decisions. And this was particularly important in this community because the school district was engaging with contractors at community-based organizations. And there were some pretty sticky politics in the community across agencies that were contracted with the district. And so setting the criteria and having representatives, right, from all of the sectors be part of that process increased agency of everyone and increased transparency of the entire process. And as I mentioned, it was a very collaborative and useful exercise to go through that development of criteria. The actual application of criteria was a little bit of a different story. And oftentimes this does come down to a district or specific level leadership having to make difficult decisions. And when we talk about sustainability and we talk about longevity, it comes with this sense of hope, right? Because we want this, we want to be able to keep doing this because we know that it's important, because we know that it's impactful, because we know that it's valued. But oftentimes when we talk about actually implementing sustainability, it means that we're also facing the flip side of that coin, which means we have to let go, that we have to accept change, that we have to adapt. And that can feel uncomfortable. And at best, it can feel uncomfortable, sometimes exciting, but oftentimes uncomfortable, and it can result in having to make some really diplomatic approaches to how to restructure or how to communicate changes. And so I just want to make sure that we have all of that on the table as we're thinking about our approach to sustainability. But this intentional approach that we're talking about today really provides an opportunity to conduct our work in a way that feels responsible to all parties involved, that feels respectful of all parties involved, and that creates a really transparent process. So that even if someone doesn't like it, they can see what the process was, as opposed to someone doesn't like it and it's also frustrating because they don't even know how this decision got made. So that's kind of some of the key opportunities that come with doing this defining and prioritization process and doing it in an open door, using an open door method where we're getting input from multiple folks. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at what we're talking about, right? So when we design and implement our intentions. So that was a little preview, but so far we've talked about how do we assess our capabilities, right? So that we know where our strengths and assets are, and have those conversations. And then we've also talked about how do we define and prioritize what we want to retain, what we want to invest in for the long term. And so now what I'd like to do is get us ready, get us positioned to actually create a concrete, actionable plan. So we can talk about it all we like, but if we're not doing anything, that doesn't get us closer to the longevity that we're looking for. So I wanted to share here one example. So there are multiple, if you Google sustainability, there's just no end to how to plan for sustainability. But I felt like this was a particularly useful one to share. It's from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and they offer 5 steps. Okay, I want to be really clear here because I'm going to be sharing different examples. So not all of these examples may be a fit for the work that you're doing. But I want to share kind of different levels of examples. And in this particular case, we're talking about systems change. And just as a reminder, systems change happens at all levels. It happens at the classroom level, it happens at the school level, it happens at the district level, it happens at the state level, and at the national level. Wherever there's a system, there's a possibility for change. And SAMHSA's 5 steps include documenting effectiveness of innovation, with specific outcomes. So that's a fancy way of saying program evaluation, which we talked about earlier, right? So making sure we have some evidence, some proof that these innovations, these outcomes are tied to these particular systems or efforts. The next one is an inventory of current resources. So that is a key step in the planning process, is doing that assessment. The third one is to focus priority options and targets for future funding. Right, so we talked a little bit about that. And then assessing the sustainability of innovations and resource options, and institutionalizing changes through documentation, dissemination, and leadership. Okay, that last one I feel like I just want to make sure that we're connecting the dots. It can mean a lot of things, right? Embedding policy into procedures, right? So that we know this is our MO, this is how we do things. And also it's about communication. So I want to just be clear, a lot of these feel like elevated ways of saying stuff that we already talked about, right? So when we talk about institutionalizing change through dissemination, that means telling people this is how we're doing it, right? Or this is how we do it. And so just again, kind of thinking about from a systems change perspective, the overlap with some of those assessment and prioritization processes that we already talked about is a key component. And this is part of a sustainability toolkit, as you can see from the source reference at the bottom. We're not going to share that right now, but we're going to share it in a couple slides. So if you're interested in looking at this entire toolkit, we'll have the link for you just shortly. Before we do that, though, I want to go ahead and move us forward to another example. Okay, so again, these are different examples of how do we design a plan. And so this 5-step process with these kind of big ticket items that you can attach to particular tools or templates is one approach. Another approach looks like this. So again, kind of different tools or different templates resonate with different folks based on the application that they're using, or kind of the mindset that they have or the culture that they're coming from in their community. So in this case, what I want to go first is top to bottom. So looking on the left side of your screen, you can see, right, that it's not just one thing that we want forever and always out there on the horizon, right? We're setting short-term goals, we're setting intermediate-term goals, and we're setting long-term goals, right, for our longevity. So what is it that we want to make sure that we can maintain and keep going right now? What about 6 months or a year from now? What about 5 or 10 years from now? Again, the time increments aren't as important as just making sure, I mean, you can define them whatever suits you, but just making sure that you have these graduated terms. And that can be important for a couple of reasons. One is having mile markers of progress is a really important feedback tool, so that you can see that you're on track and make adjustments accordingly. It's also really important morale booster, right? So folks can see metrics of success along the way. It really keeps people focused on the big picture, right? So small achievements, small steps that accumulate to these bigger accomplishments is reassuring and builds momentum for the folks involved. Now I want to go from left to right. And we're going to see this in a different form. In case this graphic doesn't resonate with you, we're going to see it in a different form in just a moment. But these are some of the elements that are useful to have in the plan if your plan is actually going to be actionable. If you're doing just a vision plan, a vision board, you know, that's kind of like putting it out to the universe and this is what we want to see manifest, That's kind of one approach. What we're talking about here in terms of templates are a guide, a step-by-step guide for what am I doing right now. And as we think about these things, I want to bring it back to something I said earlier in the session, which is these don't have to be add-ons, they can be add-ins. So thinking about the work that you're already doing, right? How do I invest more deeply in partnerships? Thinking about what I'm already doing, how do I advance some of the infrastructure or organizational capacity around this? Thinking about what I'm already doing for this program or for this strategy or for this service. How do I keep my eye open for diversified funding? So again, not add on to your list of things to do, but add in to what's already on your to-do list. And in this intention setting, we can look at what are the particular activities or tasks. I'm going from left to right now. Who is going to be responsible? Right? So who is in the prime position to do this? When do we need to do it? Are there particular times of year or meetings coming up or legislative sessions that we want to be mindful of? So putting some sort of timing in there can be really useful for making it actionable. Being aware of what resources are needed, right? So that could be piggybacking on resources that are already in place, or this could be identifying areas where there's gaps in resources, or we're going to need to put some things together in order to complete the activity. And then communication, right? And some of these can be switched around in terms of order, but communication, I feel like, I don't know, if I were designing this graphic, I would have communication underlining the entire row there, because communication about the longevity, about the vision, is going to be essential to making sure the tasks are actually being done, right? And that we're making adjustments and being intentional throughout the process. So for those of you who this graphic did not work for and are grid lovers like me, I want to share this with you. So some of you might be like, oh my God, Christina, so many words on this page, take it away. Just remember, we sat on this slide for just a couple extra minutes here. But I wanted to break it down, and we actually have this template available for you. Andrew, if you could upload it, that would be great. But I think in grids, like that's just how my brain works. And I would love everything in the world to be in a grid. And so I don't need you to read this. What I need you to do is just kind of look big picture at what we're talking about here. It's the same flow as you just saw on our kind of left to right arrows. It includes our short, our intermediate, and our long-term milestones, mile markers. And it also includes these columns, right, for the activity, what actions or changes are going to occur, who's going to carry them out, by when or for how long, what resources we need to do them, who needs to know what, and then any additional context or notes, okay? And so again, either of these templates are going to be available to you, or if you would like to adopt them or adapt them. I did not include in our resources this particular example. So if you're interested in having this example, which came from a community that I was working with in Maryland, if you're interested in looking at this actual example, just let Andrew know and we'll be able to share a redacted version of it with you. But again, this is kind of like a day-long retreat. And I think they had maybe this template actually covered maybe like 3 or 4 pages where they just really focused on what is it that they want to sustain in the next 6 months? What about in the next 12 months? What about in the next 18 months? So what are the core elements of their school mental health initiative in this particular school district? So I, again, am encouraging you not to try and read all the words on this page, but I am letting folks know I'm going to be moving the slide forward. So I don't want you to feel like you're never going to see this again. It is in the slide deck that Andrew is going to share after today's session. But I want to go ahead and move us forward. We're going to be talking about next steps of our sustainability plan. But before I do that, we actually just put this on a more pleasant looking slide for a moment. Before I do that, I do just want to be mindful that I'm doing like a little mini break here. We're coming up on the hour. We're going until 1:15 today. That said, I know that some of you may need to drop off because that's the way our schedules work sometimes. And so I wanted to just remind you that we are able to be here today and are grateful for funding from SAMHSA. And SAMHSA asks us to collect some very anonymous and very brief information from you via a survey. And I'm going to ask Andrew if you could go ahead and put that link. We're going to do it again at 1:15, but I want to make sure that folks who need to leave early have the link now. If you spend a couple minutes completing this survey, it does contribute to our ability to continue to offer these learning opportunities to you at no cost. So that's my brief pitch. You're going to hear it again at the end of today's session. I'm going to keep us moving forward because we need to talk about how do we finalize and implement our sustainability plan. Okay, so it's not just talking about what we're going to do, it's actually doing it. And so being really practical. This does not have to be pie in the sky. This is about how do we get to keep doing the things that matter most for kids, right? And in a way that feels possible, not in a way that feels impossible. And so thinking about how are you documenting this plan? If you hated all of the templates that I just showed you, that's cool, but which one are you going to use, right? If it's not one of these three, do you want to go find one yourself? Do you have one already in mind? Do you want to create one? Making sure you have documented not only what your intentions are for longevity, but the actions that need to happen in order to achieve those intentions, who needs to be involved, and what sort of resources or support you need in order to achieve it. And then creating some sort of system. You know, is this something that you check in on monthly, quarterly, biannually, at an annual retreat? You know, how often do you need to check in to make sure that you're adding in these items to what's already on your to-do list? So again, when I think of a to-do list, mine is usually like a linear list, and I like to have check marks next to each thing that I did. But in this particular case, I have my regular to-do list, and then under each item, right, I have a little asterisk that said, this is what I'm doing to build my communications capacity for sustainability on this particular item. So it's sort of, again, that kind of layered in approach, the add-in approach to what you're already doing. But how are you going to ensure that you're being mindful of it? How are you going to ensure that you are keeping track of it? Because there's so many things that distract us and pull us, and it can be really useful to have a regular touch base to ensure that you're on track. This next one, this is our third bullet. I just want to emotionally prepare you for. It's a living document. So for those of you who really like a sense of, okay, sustainability plan done. That's not how this goes. It's a living document. Our landscape changes all the time. And so for some of you that might feel good, like, okay, I don't feel like, you know, I have to get this done by a certain date and ship it off to somebody somewhere and call it a day. This is, again, just kind of an ongoing guide that you are going to regularly revisit and adjust and revise and refine based on what you're learning, based on what's changing around you, based on who's involved. And then I also just want to make a strong pitch for looping in any evaluation work that you're doing. So if you have an evaluation work group, if you have an evaluator, you know, if you know any kind of components to how are we documenting what works and the impact of our efforts for school mental health, linking it regularly to inform your sustainability intentions is going to be really important. So I want to go ahead and move us forward to some of the resources that we have in this area. And Andrew, if you could go ahead and put these in the chat. I'm hoping folks will be able to stick around for another 15 minutes or so, but just in case, I want to make sure that you're getting, these are our like big ticket items. So the top two are these sustainability toolkits. It's like everything, it's like going to like the Fred Meyers of sustainability planning. It's like everything that you could ever need is there. So we put two of them in here. There are lots of different toolkits. We put two of them in here for you. And you can kind of pick and pull from these toolkits for what it is that you're trying to do or what it is that feels possible given where you are in your bandwidth. The last piece here is the sustainability plan worksheet. And so I wanted to make a quick mention about this one, as well as some of the other resources that are about to come up on the next few slides. Quick history. So when SAMHSA had funded grant-specific TA centers, one of the centers was funded specifically to support project-aware grantees. And that was in existence for 4 years, at which time we created so many resources and tools for project-aware grantees between 2014 and 2019. And when they sunsetted, or when they unfunded that particular model of TA center, we did not want all of those resources to go to waste, but they could no longer be hosted on the SAMHSA website. And so when you hit some of these links, I want to just note that they may ask you to register. And I want to be very clear, this is in no way a marketing scam. The agreement that that TA center came up with SAMHSA was that we would be able to host all of those resources that were developed in a website as long as it wasn't in the public domain. And so this process of registering is no one will ever like email you any ads or pitch any services to you. It's a protocol that we needed to put in place so that it wasn't technically in the public domain. All registrations will be approved, and then you'll have access to the full library of resources. And so some of these links, you may hit that wall. And so I'm just encouraging you to scale the wall, because there's some really good stuff on the other side. It may be that you can click through without needing to do that, but I couldn't check in advance. And so I just wanted to set expectations that some of these are coming from that pool of resources that's being hosted as a kind of archive from the Now is the Time Technical Assistance Center. And if you have any qualms about anything I just said, contact me directly and I can download the PDF and send that to you. So again, these are our kind of big picture tools for planning, and I'm going to go ahead and move us forward to talk about some specific capacities, right? So resources for specific sustainability capacities. So workforce capacity, we know, again, when we talked about barriers, that workforce piece, whether it's the workforce pipeline, whether it's workforce turnover, workforce retention, these are really key elements to our capacity to maintain longevity. And so one of the key resources that we have here is from the Southeast MHTTC. It's a comprehensive report. And so I wanted to just make sure that you had access to that. Another key piece that we hear come up all the time around specific capacities is financing. And I have 2 areas that I wanted to specify as resources for you in this. Some of you may be familiar with the School Mental Health Best Practices Learning Series. This comes from the Mental Health Technology Centers National Network, in particular, a toolkit that was designed to guide practices for school mental health. And their module 7 really focuses on funding and sustainability. And so I wanted to give you the link to that resource. And then I want to highlight a coming soon resource from the Southeast MHTTC. And this is specific to financing through Medicaid. And this is going to be a really amazing resource to you all. It's going to be, to start, a 6-chapter FAQ document that allows you to kind of search for what it is you need to know about Medicaid reimbursable services in your school mental health initiatives, and find kind of a high-level answer. And if you want to go into the weeds, you'll be able to click down and go deep into the weeds on any of kind of the content or information that has bearing